Excellent. All right. It's 10 o'clock. We want to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. This is our advocacy series. We call this our Tea Talks. Hopefully you have your tea ready and can sip along as you learn today. This is part 2 of a panel discussion that includes discussion on the topics of the DD shared vision and supported decision-making agreements. I'm very excited. We have a great group of folks here. Let me start a little bit with some housekeeping. Today's discussion is going to be recorded. We also hope to use transcripts so folks can follow along. We will be creating an Access Alaska YouTube channel so that we can start storing these, what turns out to be large recordings, into that medium so that people can access them later. As you may know, we've been doing these since November now, monthly. With that, I'm Eric Gurley, the Executive Director of Access Alaska. We're a Center for Independent Living, and we serve many regions of the state of Alaska with multiple programs designed to support people experiencing disabilities and seniors. Today, we're putting that vision into practice, and it all starts out with a discussion on advocacy. First, let me introduce our panels. Today, we have with us Travis Noah. Travis is a self-advocate. He has been on multiple state boards and commissions and is currently an independent living advocate for Access Alaska. We also have Roy Scheller, who's a retired executive of one of the state's largest nonprofits. Roy comes to us with lots of skills and strategies, including help move folks out of institutionalized care into community-based services and promoting lots of personal, individually focused service delivery models and acknowledging personhood for folks. And we also have Ann Applegate, who is an attorney by trade and right now is the founder of Applegate Consulting and Advocacy. And we're very, very, very thankful to have Ann with us today. So let's get going. What I'd like to do is start with you, Ann. If you could, can you talk to us just back in terms of advocacy about disability rights and civil rights to help set the tone for today?
I can. Let me double check, make sure you can all hear me and see me. In a minute, I'll switch over to some slides just to kind of have another way to access the information. Sometimes people like to see the words right in front of them as well. And as lovely as we all look, it's nice to get a break from our faces. But I think it's an important thing to talk about because this is an advocacy series, right? And an advocacy topic is about different ways of kind of achieving ends, achieving a goal for an individual, a person, or for a group that is all kind of collectively joined by some shared purpose or shared identity. And when you're talking about the word to advocate, there are lots of strategies for doing that, right? There's educating, which is just about letting people know information that they don't already know. There's influencing, which is kind of a way of taking that information and showing how it applies to a good purpose, either for a person or for a bunch of people. And then the last part is really advocacy is about enforcing things that are already part of the fabric of our community. Whether they're about laws being written and enacted, or whether they're about expectations, morality, or ethics. And that kind of enforcement is often written in constitutions, or in laws, or in larger concepts of human rights. What are we entitled to because we're all people? And so I have some slides I'm going to take a quick look at. I want to set my 10-minute before I do that one, hold on, I'm going to have to get my screen share on. Down here, excuse me for a little housekeeping, because I've got a lot of screens open. Share my desktop. And then add my slides up there. Now, can everybody see my disability rights movement slides?
Yes.
Okay, good. And then I'm going to move over to this current slide. There, we should have some little water dots and a title there. Good. So the important thing about a disability rights movement and advocacy for a group that is shared is that you have some key ideas about where it comes from. You're talking about freedoms, and really the question is, what does freedom mean to you as an advocate? Does it mean the freedom to do what you want to do? And that includes connecting to other people and helping them get their freedoms. That can be part of advocacy. And I always ask people, do you have that freedom now? And if you do, how did you get it? And if you don't, how do you get it? But the whole idea about freedoms is that they come from places. They come from rights, human rights or constitutional rights or civil rights. Civil rights are about laws that are created by legislatures or by the Congress. You hear about the Senate and the House of Representatives, but you also have those in our state, and you have them even in cities like Anchorage. The important thing about having a right to say what you want to say, hold on a second, I need to get that note out of there, and I need to move all of our pictures off of my own text. There we go. Free speech means that the government can't stop you from speaking. Oh, sorry, there you go. But what if speech isn't nice or kind or friendly or clean or patriotic? Still, the government can't stop speech unless there's an immediate serious danger. They can limit the time and place, but not the content. So there's all kinds of ways to communicate what it is you want to see happen. Protesting is a legitimate way to do that. Marching like the Key Campaign does in the beginning of the session, usually in Juneau, they go down and they have a educational session. We all learn about the issues, and then we show how strong we are together, and we march or we roll or we even take vans and drop people off at the plaza outside of the Capitol steps. And we talk about why issues are important, why funding is important, why that budget piece that Roy has been talking about is so crucial. And that's about educating and also about influencing. People that are not from the government can stop you from saying things. The private citizens and private businesses can tell you no. That's free speech is not against private individuals as a right. It's enforced against the government. You also have a right to be left alone, privacy. And that privacy right means free from interference in your home life, your choices about where you live, the choices about who you define as your family. Family isn't just blood, and it's not just who we marry, it's who we connect with, it's who we care about, it's who cares about us. You also you've heard about your HIPAA rights, right? Giving personal information only to people you choose. You get to limit that as part of your dignity and also as part of your privacy right under the law. It also includes the right to buy and use birth control to prevent having children if you're sexually active. It can be about getting an abortion, marrying who you want, divorcing who you want. The government gets to make rules that protect people's health and their safety. But they also get to say what rights married people have, because having people married is kind of a good thing in terms of all the other policy stuff that the government wants. So they can define that some, but that's it. You can also have the right to be treated the same as everyone else. And that's sort of what we're talking about when I talk about supported decision-making agreements, because everyone else gets to define how they make decisions and who helps them. And that's one of those important civil rights. Equality means that people in the same circumstances get treated the same. Equal protection is different. It means that the government guarantees the same rights and protections to all. It's an important difference because there are ways in which the government provides particular access to particular kinds of benefits and services, and they have to make that, they have to try to level the playing field make it the same kind of choices that other people have, besides the group that you're talking about. And that's important when you're talking about access to services for people with disabilities. And then this question was but what if is something that we were working on in a little seminar that I was working on. But you also have to have a right to have a say in what happens. Representation is what we talk about there, and that means having a vote. You get to choose. Now, we also talk about freedoms having responsibilities that are with them, and learning about what the decisions are is another way that you can become engaged with supporters in a supported decision-making agreement, and they can help you do a vote by making sure you have access to information and access to polls or alternate ways to vote. But people always bring this up whenever I talk about voting, especially in the context of communities who experience disabilities and impacts on access. And they always say, well, what if people are voting because they like the way someone looks, or because their family always votes that way, or that because they think that it's a particular group or a particular party, and so they don't even ask any more about that. And I always say, I don't see how that's different, whether you're talking about a person who experiences developmental disability or a person who doesn't. Everybody is likely to make some kind of quick snap judgment if they don't have other information, or the reality is that the trust that they have about their information is just coming in a different way. So if someone votes for somebody because their family always votes for people from that group, it's because they trust their family. And they're substituting their own judgment for someone else's judgment because they've already made a trust decision. They've already trust that source of information. And that happens. As a lawyer, people regularly call me and say, who should I vote for school board? And I'll say, well, this is so-and-so and so-and-so think this, and so-and-so and so-and-so are talking about this particular other thing. This is what I'm doing. But those people already trust me. They know me well, and they're ready to take my advice. And I think that's what people do a lot. So quickly, these rights haven't been always available to everybody. Right? Freedom of movement and association. People with disabilities a long time ago were placed in prisons because there weren't home-based services, and there weren't places that were even designed to try to accommodate their meaningful lives at all. And soon after that, around 1850, so-called reforms started, and those resulted in segregation and people placed in what were called asylums or in state schools. People were lumped together so that people who were elderly and had medical difficulties were also in the same place with people who had developmental disabilities that could have been accommodated, and they could have had their choices to live out in the community. And people who experienced mental illness were also in this mix. So there were some real vulnerable people that were mixed with people who weren't able to conform to kind of the way things were, the way people behaved with each other, and all in one place. That resulted in homebound, isolated lives for people who were physically not able to access the rest of community as well. So people were either in homebound, isolated lives, or they were in asylums or state schools. Some of the exceptions, even around this time, were the early schools. Perkins School for the Blind was always a pretty progressive place, and so was Gallaudet University, which were both started a long time ago. Life in institutions, I'm just going to go through really quickly because it is heartbreaking, but I want to make sure that people recognize that this was real. And this is what happens without advocacy. This is what happened then because families and people who experience disabilities didn't have strategies for having their voices heard, or their civil rights getting defined as having the right to do things other than this. Willowbrook, Pennhurst, Belchertown, the Oregon State School, there was experimentation that was done. So disability leaders wanted change, and parents, families, and people who experience disabilities came together with these common issues around common needs and shared identity and created a civil rights movement that reflected the movements from other groups that were being segregated and denied their rights. 1950s and 60s, it started. And people with disabilities began to rise up against the history of exclusion and institutionalization and stigmatism, and assert the right to services at home, to access to transportation, to employment, to education. The Gang of, I always do this because I want people to know the history of advocacy. So the Gang of 19 was a group that chained themselves to buses because the buses, they couldn't get on them. So why should the buses move? They challenged people's ideas about ability and disability and the possibilities that were being denied, the opportunities that were being denied to fellow American citizens. Here's a young woman who is, or a girl who is now a young woman, or actually probably she's closer to my age now. And you see her there with her red bandana. She wanted the Congress, because you couldn't get up, they couldn't enter the Capitol and they couldn't enter the Supreme Court buildings because there was no accessible entrance. So she climbed out of a wheelchair. She was helped out of the wheelchair and she said, I want to climb to the top because I want them to see that this is how I'm going to get there. Ed Roberts is what considered the father of the independent living movement. He flew on an airplane without an assistant, even though he was medically fragile, because he said, I want them to see the risk that I have to face to get to Washington, D.C. to advocate for myself and people like me. Judy Heumann and Kitty Cohn. Everybody knows Judy Heumann. I don't know if people are as familiar with Kitty Cohn, but they created a demonstration to enforce the 504 regulations that required civil rights be available and accommodations be made in any place that got federal funding. For a year, the commissioner, the director of the US Department of Health and Social Services, Health and Human Services, refused to enforce the 504 regulations. Congress had passed it. It was then the agency had created these regulations. And then he just said it was too costly for business and for government to implement. So after months and months of negotiation, they just demonstrated, they occupied 5 different states' buildings and in federal buildings in 5 different states. And at the very end, the only one left was in San Francisco. And they were there, I can't remember, 170 days, I think. And they won. The US government just started to implement the policies and enforce 504.
As you're wrapping up.
Yeah, sorry. What I want to point out is peer advocacy groups. This is what you should be looking for if you're interested in advocating in this kind of organized way. Every single state has peer advocacy groups. There are independent living centers in every state, developmental disability councils in every state. There are disability law centers in every state, parent training centers in every state, and university centers for excellence in every state. And these are the places you want to look for in wherever you are, Alaska or any place. And these are some great resources It's Our Story project. And this, I will spare you, but it's a 2-minute video too, I Won't Back Down. And it's a bunch of pictures with Alaskans and national advocates, but we'll do it another time.
Absolutely. And if you're able to share the PowerPoint in, I know folks would be interested. Really appreciate that. Right. As we're transitioning, Travis, as you start talking about the DD shared vision, one of the focuses that we heard last month was how you design your own vision for your own life. What does that self-determined life look like? Can you talk in terms of the nuts and bolts? What does that mean? If somebody is wanting to engage that process, how do they interpret and make turn policy into practice utilizing that DD shared vision?
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Folks, Eric gives a very good definition of where he wants me to go here. But let me start out by saying that definition, nuts and bolts of this, may sound a little bit complicated when you think about living your life the way that you choose will support you to right, but it's really not if you take it in segments, folks. Um, I've been an advocate for myself since I was 15 years old. And I have been trying to develop my own life, for example, to the way that I want it to be since I was 15. When my family, believe it or not, forced me to start learning how to use my voice. I wasn't given a choice. They said, you have to do this or you're not going to get anywhere. So it really comes down to when you put the vision in practice, the biggest way you need to look at this, folks, I hope those of you that are participating today saw our last webinar last month, because I talked about the vision statement, which is people living the lives they choose with the supports they direct. Really, when you're talking about designing your life the way you want it, that's it, folks. That right there is it. Based on your needs, you design a life where you get the supports you need to help you live the life that you want to live with your control, and design those supports the way you want them to be. Biggest example I can give, I'll use my own experience again, is technically I live in what's licensed as a group home. Most people hear the term group home and they think institution, that are not familiar with group homes. They automate it, just sadly, it's a common definition that's automatically defined. And I'm here to tell you, they're not. They're not. Group homes are so far from an institution, it's an understatement. But I live the most independent living style of life for someone that isn't a group home. Thanks to a couple of friends, a couple of mentors, and other people that I've developed connections with throughout the state, as Eric mentioned earlier in the presentation, I have technology throughout my home that allows me to live fairly independently. Do I have access to staff 24/7 if I need it? Yes, of course, because there's a lot of physical needs I have. But that doesn't mean they're in my face 24/7. They only come to me when I need assistance. Other than that, I make my own meals. I do my own budgets. I arrange when I go somewhere. Of course, under COVID, like everybody's facing right now, that's virtually non-existent. But the point is, I live a life at my choice, at my discretion. I have a family that comes to visit. I have people that stay with me that I choose to have stay with me. But I design my life around what I want to do in my life. My career is a big part of that. When I started designing my life, my goal was, how do I get to a point where I can use my skill set to help others live a better life than what I had growing up? And I'm not done with my career, folks, but the reality is I'm at a point now in my career that I couldn't be happier, because I'm allowed to help people with the skills that I have. But don't, please, what you're hearing out of me today, don't use me as the baseline. Don't. I can't stress that enough. Do not do that. Use me as an example. If you have questions about how to look at your own life and discuss it, and you need help to figure out how to design each segment, I'm willing to help. But the reality is, folks, when you design your life, you need to look at each segment of your life that you want help in and the segments that you don't, and figure out, where can I give and take? Where can I get natural supports? And what do I want to let go of? Because the reality is, nobody's going to be able to do everything they want to do in life. You're going to run into those situations where it's like, you know what? It's not a barrier, but this is just, at this point in my life, it's not a good idea to work on it. But that does not mean give up on it. I'm telling you, from somebody that's experienced this, it means put it aside for a little while. Work on something else, get that part of your life where you want it to be. And then once you develop a pattern of, I feel great, my life is starting to go somewhere, then work on the segments you're missing. But it takes time, folks. I've been developing my vision of my life for the past now 14 years. It's not an overnight thing, folks. I've been doing this for 14 years and an advocate for 20. Do the math on that. There's only 6 years there that I wasn't doing anything on it. This takes time. There's no segment in your life when you're designing the vision of what you want your life to be that says it's going to be done overnight, much less during the process, something's going to change. And you're going to say, you know what? Vision of my life has changed. Let me work on this instead. So consider nuts and bolts just being what you want your own life to look like. And do not let politicians, do not let anybody that has power tell you that something can't be done. Have faith in your own self. That is the most important segment of the vision. You have to believe that no matter what you're facing, you can achieve something. You have to absolutely believe it, because that's the nuts and bolts of this. If you don't, that's where you have to start. You have to start saying that you can believe in yourself and what your skill set is and what your desires are, and move forward. And the rest of this presentation, you will hear pieces of that from Anne and Mr. Scheller that will tell you those things are what's important. And you're going to hear control of the budget. Oh yeah, how is that important to my own life? I'm telling you, folks, what Roy's going to talk about, and maybe if I chime in, it is important, because once control of the budget is implemented, you can control where the money that you're getting from the government for assistance goes and what it does to help you live the life you choose. Without that, you still have to work around this medical model system that we talked about in the last seminar. That's an important feature of this, folks. But overall, just believe in yourself and design the vision around your life, your wants, your desires, and your activities. It's simple, folks. It just takes years of work. It's not something you're going to get done in 6 months. Believe me.
Thank you, Travis. Let's take that a step further. Roy, I know just we've had the benefit of a long-term relationship, you and I. There's a process that you taught several folks, including myself, called finding the essence of a person. Talk a little bit about that and helping people with their primary voices, and maybe using that tool to help shape what Travis is saying, in that you have to sit down and look at each segment of your life when you're trying to develop that vision for yourself, that self-determined life.
Sure. Hello, everybody, and thanks, Eric and Ann and Travis, for your roles in this very, very important topic of advocacy. In part, what I want to talk with people about today is, as Eric is describing and defining the essence of a person, though, is the ethics of advocacy. It's not a conversation that's talked about a lot. We talk about advocacy, and people advocate for people or for themselves, but there's a very important underlying sense of ethics that as individuals we must honor and fulfill every chance that we can. The ethics of advocacy really boil down to the concept of that you have to hear and see the person that you are interacting with. In that moment that you're interacting and listening, that person is the most important person in the world in that moment. So whether your voice is your own voice and you're advocating for yourself, or you're a paid support who's attempting to support somebody by adding your voice to theirs, or in some cases having to be the voice for that person because they don't have it. We want you to start thinking about the ethics. A person should never advocate for something that they want for themselves for another person. Right? You don't start the premise by saying, this is what I think is best for this person. The dialogue has to be about, this is what the person is asking for. This is what the person wants. And a key to that for a lot of people who either don't have their own voice, or their voice unfortunately has been silenced by others over years of being ignored. You have to assume the fact that all behavior is communication. Doesn't matter what the behavior is, but all behavior of human beings is intended to communicate something about themselves, either their current life or their desired life. And it's important to really begin thinking about that. So you're watching people, you're observing people, you're talking, you're interacting, and you're trying to sense their sense of behaviors. Are they passionate about something? Do they get agitated about something? If you ask them a question and they first say the word no, explore that. If they say the word yes, explore that also. And the worst thing that I think that we can do on behalf of another person is express what we believe is best for them. I like to try to get you to really reject that thinking completely. And if you're advocating for yourself, expect those ethics from the person who you're advocating to. If there's a paid support in your life, if there's even a non-paid support, a friend, all right, always be thinking about the fact that, are they sharing what you desire, what you're asking for, what you're seeking, or are they representing what they believe is best for you? Some terrible things can happen when other people are thinking about what's best for somebody. Now, I've attached to Access Alaska 2 tools that I've used over the years in helping find the essence of a person. And finding the essence is, what is it that they're looking for? As Travis is saying, what is the person trying to express in terms of the life that they want to lead? What is that? There are people who love rural areas, and yet they may end up living in the middle of the city, right? There are people who, one person I know in particular, who loves cities and is living in a country area, in a rural area. And she just views her life as, I'm living here with, a lot of cows and horses and things, and I don't want that. I want buses and movies and plays and things like that. So you really got to be always thinking and always careful for that. The 2 documents, one is for helping find the essence of a person in a group setting, and one is for helping find the essence of a person one-on-one. And they just talk. They really come from a more of an ethnographic kind of an approach to interacting with someone, but really seeing and hearing them. I'll be very happy over time to answer questions that people may have. If Eric, if Access or people are there utilizing them and want to have some more support or dialogue with me, I'm more than happy to do that. But again, remember, everybody, please, that as Ann and Travis are expressing the civil rights movement and the right to live the life that you want, that those who are interacting with you should hold themselves to a high standard of ethics. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy. Absolutely. I think anytime a person can have themselves, their advocates all involved in helping shape the true honest effort of what they desire, everyone wins.
Eric, I'd like to add one thing onto Roy's statement, if I can, real quick.
Go ahead.
Folks, Roy is correct in everything that he told you, but let me add this. I said this the last time, but I can't stress it enough because I live with this, even though I'm an advocate professionally and personally. Please, anybody that has trouble communicating, verbally, whatever method it is for their challenge. Forgive me, I hate the word disability because how am I disabled when I live this life and I've lived it since I was a kid? But everybody can communicate is what I believe. I don't care what their situation is. Please try to figure that out in the process of designing the person's vision or your own. If you have trouble communicating, figure out a method of it. And if you can't, that's when advocates professionally can help you learn how to advocate for yourself, much less figure out the areas in which you might need help of a professional to get your point across so you don't get looked at negatively. But figure out your own voice first. Don't lean on someone else initially just because you're afraid. Please consider that.
Outstanding. Thanks, Travis. Let's take that further and let's go into supportive decision-making agreements. And Travis, can you guys talk to the group a little bit about that?
Hey, Travis, what I would love is if you would start with talking about expanding a little bit on the last thing you just said, which was so right, which is that everyone can communicate. The second part of it is that everyone has things that they care about, whether or not they are making the decision. And it doesn't matter, like you and I have talked about this a lot. It doesn't matter if you as a caregiver or a parent or a family member recognize that that is a decision that they want to have, and that it aligns with your priorities for making decisions. Like people have different things they care about. So would you give I know you and I have talked about this, Travis, and you have great examples of it and in your life and the life of your peers and other people you've known. If you can talk about that a little bit, like not just about communication, but also just a desire to chart your own course.
Yeah, I can give an example of mine really quickly, and I can give a bigger example of someone I've actually helped professionally that I think is going to carry more weight than even mine. With me, Ann and I are going to be talking about SDMAs, but this example is going to be before SDMAs even existed. I had first become a legal adult at the age of 18, okay? And I decided with my parents, my decision though, that I wanted to move out. And I wanted to try to see if I can make my own life. Well, I started going through the process back home in North Pole, Alaska, where my family lives, of trying to move out. Well, I met with somebody at the biggest agency up there. Eric knows the one I'm talking about. And the discussion was between me and my mom and this one person. We were trying to get everything connected because I was already on a waiver. And the person looked right at my mom and said to my mother and me at the same time, who is going to be Travis's guardian? That was exactly what was said to my family. Who in your family is going to be Travis's guardian? And my mom looked at me in shock for a second and then looked at this lady and went, what do you mean? Travis is more than capable of being his own guardian. And the lady basically said, no, he's not. He has cerebral palsy. Somebody needs to make decisions for him. It's pretty much the detail. And my mom went, no, my son is his own guardian. He will rely on us to help make decisions if he's stuck, but he's capable of making his own decisions. That's my example. Now, flip that around. SDMAs come along. And at my previous job, I got assigned to work with an individual that has, ironically, cerebral palsy in a different style and format, had a state guardian, and wanted to get his own guardianship back. but had no clue how, not a one. So my job became to work with him on teaching him the skills necessary. Once I got him to a point, he started believing that it's possible. Then once he believed it was possible, what we did is I sat down with him and we had a discussion about what his SDMA, which Ann and I will talk more on, will look like, what it could look like. He designed his SDMA. We worked on his skills further and further while we were designing it. He went to the court system, proved that he's capable, became his own guardian, and moved out of state to live with his fiance in Arizona. And that's where he currently is now. And again, I mention that because he went from not being his own guardian and wanting it back, and his family members saying he can't do it, to me assisting him. And now he is his own guardian, has the support of an SDMA and support team members that he chose, and he's living the life he wants in a different state with his family.
That's exactly what I was hoping you would talk about, and you say it so clearly because it's such a real thing. And what I want to do quickly, because I know we're bumping into the end, and I want to make sure that there's time for Eric to wrap up. I had a slide deck that I was going to go back to, but I just realized. And do you think, Travis, this is a good time to just introduce the website? I mean, yeah. It's where all of those tools are, and I can do it by sharing my screen. What I'm going to do is share again, and let's see, let's go there, and then come on, move over here. I've got all these boxes that I'm trying to move around. You should be looking at just a regular old Google screen if that's what you
we are, and
awesome.
You're fine.
Okay, so then what we're going to do is SDMA Alaska. Easy peasy, right? They just got this back up, which is awesome. Here it is. And here it is down here. Anyone, you can see the beginning of the line there. Anyone who wants supports can have a written agreement. You can go to the top one, which is the biggest front page there. And here we are. There's a home page, which is this one. There is a page for decision makers, which is people who want to have an SDMA, supporters and family guardians. There's one for lawyers, paralegals, non-lawyer advocates. These are for policymakers. My goal when I was building this was to make sure that 60% of the information was state specific, just for Alaska. And there are others. This is a page for service providers and care coordinators. We've got one that addresses supported decision-making in education and how it can be incorporated as a learning tool for self choices and self-regulation and setting goals as an adult. We've got a section for older Alaskans because I partnered with, or we partnered with AARP to pass the law and also for other resources. There's an overview, and then there's step-by-step training videos and contact information for referrals to organizations that have already done the training, like HOPE and the ARC and Frontier. I did a training a long time ago at Access, but it was a long time ago before we even had the structure. So I don't know if your staff has gone through the training. And also the Disability Law Center, which is a place that you can just call and say, I want a supported decision-making agreement, or somebody that I've been working with or helping or am a friend of has mentioned that they want one. You can call directly and they'll get you started. But what I'm going to do is go to the place where we've got decision makers and supporters and family guardians. And each of these, there's an accessibility video at the front, which is just me. I think 2 years ago, maybe a year ago. But what we have along here is a description and then some videos about an example from one of my friends, Ian Miner. And then you've got how to make a supported decision-making agreement. There's some other ideas about international laws and decision-making, but all of the tools help for supporters under a supported decision-making agreement, which is from AARP. Hold on, somebody trying to call me. But how to make a supported decision-making agreement. Oh, my connection is not private. Let's see, advanced. No, hide advanced. I just need to tell them to let me go. Oh, you know what? Never mind. That's an ACLU one anyway. So I'm going to go back to safety, I guess.
The other thing I wanted to mention really quick, folks, while Anne's getting her stuff back together, is keep in mind, we're talking about this as part of the shared vision, but there's one thing I've got to stress, folks. I absolutely have to stress this. You do not, reiterate, have to have a disability in order to use one of these. Anybody in anyone's life, I don't care what section of life you're in, especially seniors, even if they're not experiencing disability and they're just getting older, they can get an SDMA. It's not disability specific. I stress that because I don't want the world thinking all we're concerned about is people with disabilities here. No, this works for everybody.
Right, exactly. And I realized that they had moved after the hack from the all of the systems are down. They moved things back to this page. So under the service providers and care coordinators page, there's a guide that we wrote that describes nuts and bolts, step by step, what kinds of questions get asked. It's similar to the essence questions and the discussion about ethical supporting. How do you make sure that the information that you're getting about goals and about choices for decision making are from the person that wants that supported decision making agreement, and not superimposed, and not your ideas of best ideas and best practices. There's also this guide here, and this is a guide that was written by the ACLU, the Civil Liberties Union for this country, and they have a guide that is check boxes and pictures, and it's very accessible, and it's in plain language, and it's designed from the perspective of a person with disabilities or their family as reporters. So this is a really good place to find these documents. And honestly, the step-by-step training videos were very helpful. Hope helped us with staffing. We created some scenarios so that people could get an idea about what it might look like even to go through the process. Or to help somebody go through the process. So wander around in this website and you will find all of the tools that you need, as well as the referral places that you need. These are some of our vignettes that help describe the process, demonstrate the process. But there's referrals again to the agencies that I referred to, and also to the Disability Law Center. So that's, I mean, Eric, I think that's the best way to tell people how to get started. Again, talking about the same thing we talked about last time, there are lots of tools that can be used besides supported decision-making agreements. Individualization, meeting people where they are if you are the helper, or defining for other people, if you're the person who wants the supported decision-making agreement, defining for them, telling them what you want. There are tools for every level of kind of support or reassurance or security, making people feel as though they are heard and their goals are, their written goals reflect what they really want, and that there are the helpers that are around and supporters that are around to make those decisions real in their lives. Those tools are there, and they're not just SDMAs, they're powers of attorney, they're medical directives, advanced medical directives, and conservatorship, or tools for banking that help have another set of eyes on. There's all kinds of stuff, so don't settle. That's all I want to say. Travis, you agree?
Yeah, I will add something in, no surprise, I'm sure Eric's grinning at that. Look, there are individuals that are going to go through the vision process that I talked about earlier, and they're going to say, oh, this is all well and good, but you know what? I look at this and I really would prefer somebody be my guardian and make the decisions for me and just help me, with all of that, and I just deal with the rest. That's okay too, folks. We're not saying you have to do everything the way we're describing it, but what I would encourage you is anybody that's online today, look at guardianship. I'm going to encourage that to be your last resort. look at your other options first. But if you decide that you want someone to be your guardian, I would encourage, if you're going to do that, make sure it's a guardian that is on your side, knows that you have a voice, and is going to help you make the choice. Even though they're making the overall final decision, try to get a guardian that's on your side and going to help you, instead of just say, oh, well, no, you can't do this. So, and generally guardians, unfortunately, they tend to be on the side of, you don't know anything. So I encourage that to be your last option.
And you should be looking at a slide that talks about the Guardians Authority in Alaska. Is that there on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so talking about what you were just saying is it's a big transfer of authority, and it's that kind of sweeping authority was designed to be for a narrow lane of folks. It's for people who want that, first of all, like you were talking about, Travis. It's also about people who are seen or demonstrated to be really at risk of having the kind of cliff edge circumstances that you just don't come back from a decision. That's supposed to be a narrow lane. And it wasn't. It's gradually grown, but there are these other things. There are limited guardianships that are really for areas of real concern, and other decision making can fall into in SDMA or some other place like a power of attorney. Talking about just money, there's conservatorships, and they can be about limited, like only about finances and banking for housing, if that's an area of real risk for a person. POA's powers of attorney are revocable, which means that somebody can have authority over whether or not it's working well. They can decide that this relationship isn't good anymore and they want to do something else. That gives people some power over that. There are different types of powers of attorney. They can be general or they can be specific, just about education, just about a business transaction or buying a home. Another great tool is advanced healthcare directives. You've heard me talk about those. We also have, representative payees are supposed to only be about managing benefits from Social Security, not other sources of income. But sometimes that gets expanded beyond what's appropriate for people's decision making and their desire to make decisions about other money. And then here we are, and I'm going to I see that we've got 1052. I just want to go over kind of the formal definition of SDMAs. Here it is, and then the page to go to, but it's written and signed, it's notarized, it lists the team members and their roles, it describes how each of those people gives support, it describes how big decisions get made based on what a person wants for themselves. It refers to attached documents like the ones I've just described. It includes authorizations for release of information, all in the same document. If a guardianship is in place, the guardian approves it and signs it. And it can be used together with other tools for decision making. It protects against abuse and neglect. It's actually been shown to do this. More eyes on is better. It also, the only real data we have is that people who have SDMAs are more likely to be in a job that they've chosen and maintain employment. I've already told you about those, and I've already kind of talked about these resources, but there they are. Now, done.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Travis. Your examples really tie all of this together. I appreciate you guys also working and showing folks the web-based information. That will always be a tool that people can use. We have questions in the chat about the availability of the PowerPoints. What we're trying to do is get these items loaded into the YouTube channel so that people can see them there. But we will have resources like into Roy's tools related to defining the essence. And Anne, if you're still able to share your PowerPoints, we'll try to make those available to folks as well. One quick thing I wanted to do is usually we take a pause and we have our housekeeping of our door prizes. Bridget, do you have any folks identified?
Yeah, I do. So this month, Our book is called Disabled Rights. It's by Jacqueline Vaughn, and we have 2 winners. It will be Amanda Race and Jessica Rogers. You should be receiving an email, likely from either myself or our staff, Crystal Blair, within the next week or so, requesting what your mailing address is, and then we'll get that sent out to you guys as just a thank you for participating today.
That's awesome, great. One last topic we wanted to cover, I'll let the panel decide who would like to speak to it, but it's talking about that, wrapping this up with control of the budget, and what does that look like? Travis, do you want to start?
I can. I touched on this earlier, folks, but really what this is those of you who have heard of Senior Disability Services and waiver have probably heard the term medical model. Well, what that basically means is the budget that a waiver gives, whether you're doing independent living or some other form of waiver, is the budget is set. If you're given a diagnosis and you're given a waiver, for example, you're given a set amount of money under what diagnosis you fit, but you're not really told how that money can be used. SDS is not given control over how they divvy the money out. They're just told, yes, this person fits this waiver, or no, they're not. Budget authority would give SDS and the individual that actually is receiving the services more control over how that money is spent to benefit them based on their level of need. Roy can speak to that better than I can, but that's basically in a nutshell what that is.
I believe, just to try to get the essence of the concept out to people, I believe that I could go into any agency, organization, probably any family and any individual, and identify their values based on how they spend their money. So does an organization put money into prevention, or is the majority of their money going into the most restrictive or worst case result as after things have already happened to a person? Are they putting things into job developments or putting more money into prisons? We all spend our money and we allocate our resources based on the things that we either consciously or unconsciously value. And when you think of the state of Alaska, or any state of, I don't mean the state of Alaska, but any state or any agency or any provider, all right, how do they spend their money? Okay, how do they allocate their resources? Is an indication specifically of the values that that company or organization has. And so I just want to use that as the basic premise of why this is an important topic. Control of the money on a state level should be with people who have the values of a social model. And control of the money on an individual basis should be for the person who's receiving the supports. How should that money be spent on me should come from my voice saying, this is how I want that money to be spent. And that's really the essence of what we've been trying to communicate.
Thank you, you guys. This has been tremendous. I always feel bad because we could really spend a semester's worth of time going over these topics. And it still would probably be pressed hard for time because it just requires so much engagement and other opportunities for people to really have a chance to hear those experiences and be able to take them forward. Travis is an independent living advocate here at Access Alaska. He works with a team of others, and we're always willing to take calls and hear how we can help support you in a meaningful way. Please reach out. With COVID, we do have some cautions in terms of how we engage with folks, but we are there to be a support. As I'm winding up here today, panel, thank you, thank you, thank you. probably going to be reaching out in the future for some other mechanism and ways to help share your wisdom with the state of Alaska and others. We do expect to have our tech figured out, so we have this posted on a YouTube channel. Advocacy is just so important for all of the folks in Alaska, wherever they are in the demographics and wherever they are in life's age of continuum. It's my nice way of saying becoming mature. As we continue with this advocacy series, next month, stay tuned. We do have a presentation from the FBI. They will be discussing civil rights and hate crimes. We are very excited. Honestly, we learned just in working with them to review what the presentation would look like. They recognize across the nation, they have not done this type of presentation. And all of us are very, very concerned that we recognize the need to educate folks on how to ensure their civil rights are being held and how to report any hate crime regarding disabilities. So please attend and bring others. We expected to stop in March, but we're looking at continuing. We continue to receive topics that are of interest to folks. We'll be looking at disabilities and employment in April, and in May, we anticipate a discussion and presentation on reproductive rights. Listen, advocacy is everyone's rights, you guys. The right to vote, to participate, to represent. Please mark your calendars, join us. If you have any questions or feedback, please reach out. We have an info@accessalaska.org, very easy email, or reach out to anyone on this panel, including myself. Thanks again. Have a great day and take care.